I'm joined today by Holly Stone. She has her own private practice as a clinical solution focused hypnotherapist. She supports people currently experiencing disordered eating, and she also holds the Master Practitioner certification in eating disorders and obesity from the National Centre of Eating Disorders. Before we start, I just wanted to point out that if anybody finds the information that we discussed today difficult, or if you are concerned about a loved one or yourself, there will be some information available in the show notes, which you can use to find a bit more information and support.
This is Solutions for the Mind from the Association for Solution Focused Hypnotherapy.
So, Holly, I would like to talk to you today about disordered eating, your kind of specialism in the clients that you work with. And we know that disordered eating can be a significant problem. So, what are the kind of things that clients come to see you about?
I think the majority, and what is kind of currently a buzzword, is this food noise. You might have heard about that. So that manifests in so many different ways, but it's clients that are coming because they feel totally all consumed by food. They wake up thinking about it, they go to bed thinking about it, even when they're not supposed to be thinking about it. Their mind is constantly chattering, whether it's numbers around calories or whether what they just ate was good or bad. So it's coming to me to try and find peace from that constant chatter, to find themselves and freedom to think for themselves rather than this constant dictating narrative that's running in the background. So it manifests in so many different ways, but I think that covers the majority, in that they just don't feel in control around food.
And so, if somebody was coming to see you, they obviously believe that this is a problem. So, in your kind of opinion, when does that disordered eating become a problem for somebody?
That's such a good question. And you've probably heard the phrase, I often refer to problems as a problem is only a problem if it's a problem. And I think that really applies to a lot of people, because for many people, disordered eating patterns are actually a positive, and
Mm.
they'd never cross my threshold. It enables them to eat a more balanced diet. It enables them to, feel healthier. So those routines that for some people are very limiting, for others are actually part of their solution. So I think from my point of view, it becomes a problem when the client is finding that they just can't do anything else without the consideration of the rules that they've got around food. So as I said, for some, it's really not a problem. Others, they really can't think or do anything without having this constant narrative. So they come to me because they just can't cope anymore. It's
Mm.
exhausting, it's overwhelming, and they've lost sense of who they are, and they're struggling to function on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And would you say that that is always about the food for them?
For them, yes.
Mm.
Although we know that many food-related issues are often emotionally led. We have that language that we use referring our clients to the knowledge of the stress bucket, that storage system, my apologies, put my teeth in, that we all have, that carries a certain amount of stress. So long as we've got a nice balance to that stress system, often we can cope really well with everything that life throws at us. But often where food is concerned, it's kind of snuck in effectively through the back door when someone's been navigating quite stressful periods for a
Mm.
long stretch of time. Not always, but often it's a coping mechanism in some shape or form to navigate stress, which falls very nicely into the solution focused approach, because stress management is one of our primary areas of concern.
Mm. So when you were saying it kind of takes over their life and it has this huge impact, what kind of ways would it impact that person and the people around them?
I think the biggest thing is, although the client often feels out of control, and many familiar narratives are that they feel like they're failing and that they're no good, and that life is really, very, very tough, it often stems from a need to control. And food is a really, really good aspect for both bringing controls in, but also rewarding the discomfort. So it manifests in so many different ways. Some people it is counting numbers, the joys of calorie counting, which everyone I'm sure is very familiar with. For other people, it's very extreme beliefs around good foods and bad foods. For others, it's because they're worried about their weight. So they're trying to do something that actually has a direct impact on what they look like or what they feel like. The truth is it manifests so differently for each individual. And in our approach as solution focused hypnotherapists, we take each client exactly as we find them. So regardless of a client's presentation or their explanation of their problem to me, I'm going to find out what the solution for them would be, what that's going to look like, and we work together to find that. So there's no set pro forma that
Mm,
I kind of create an agenda. Oh, well, this person's got this problem, so this is how we're going to work. It's
mm,
just, well, what's the solution to you? What's it going to be like when you're not dictated to by food every day, when you can wake up and actually decide what you're going to do with your day, meeting friends, for example, because many people find that they cancel social engagements. They
mm.
just can't interact. So their world is shrinking. And so they're not meeting their needs. They're not feeling particularly great about themselves. So it's finding that first way in. So food is often part of the problem, can also be part of the solution too.
It's interesting because I think, like you saying, that definition between it being a problem and it not being a problem. So for some people, if you're going out for a meal, they might enjoy looking at the menu beforehand and thinking about
Yeah.
what they're going to eat, and it feels like quite a positive experience.
Yeah.
Whereas for some people, they might feel like they have to look at the menu before and check the calories, and then they're feeling stressed and anxious and worried about it in the run up to the event. So I think from what you're saying, it's down to the person and the impact it has on that person as opposed to the actual behaviour itself necessarily.
Absolutely. And I think, there's a very fine line between disordered eating and then stepping into the world of disordered eating,
Yeah,
eating disorders, my
yeah,
apologies, which also is something that I work with. But I think it's even appreciating that for the audience, they might be familiar with some of those official diagnostic criteria, anorexia nervosa, bulimia, ARFID, all these other diagnoses of eating disorders. Again, that means not a lot to me because each anorexia sufferer that I've had the privilege of working with is uniquely
mm,
different.
yeah,
So there's never one size fits all. That's the joy of how we work, isn't it? We don't have preconceived ideas. We listen to the client and hear their problem, their interpretation.
yeah,
They're the best expert. They're the expert of their problem, and they're also, with our help, going to find the solutions.
yeah.
And I really do believe that.
Yeah, I was just thinking from our listeners' perspective that, some people might not think that they would have to have therapy or that they benefit from therapy. But from what you're saying, if you're finding food problematic or if your relationship is tricky, then you could always benefit from working on that. So,
I agree. I often have a phrase in my mind in that you don't need to be frazzled or broken to have therapy. Therapy also can be an empowering situation to help you be better than you already are. So you don't have to be broken or really be struggling. But where food is concerned, most clients have got a pretty good idea of where the problem is lying and what is limiting them in being able to do. And I always feel incredibly privileged that I can help those clients, whether it's weight management, however that manifests. We're looking at the holistic side of things and helping them to change what is changeable to enable them to regain control around food.
yeah. Just from my own personal experience, I know a lot of the time people come to see us and say, I've tried everything and nothing works. And particularly around food and dieting and weight management. So, if you have got somebody who's listening who thinks, I've tried everything, it's impossible, nothing works for me, how does solution focused hypnotherapy work and how could it support somebody?
Well, I think our way of working is often refreshing to those people that have tried everything because we often don't tackle the problem head on. we start by explaining to the client actually what's happening from the neurological point of view, from the science of their brain. We almost take their brain out and put it on the table with them and enable them to see why they are experiencing what they're experiencing. And the reason we do that is to help to empower, but also to help them understand that they're not failing, they're not broken. It's just because their brain has been trying to cope with whatever has been going on in life, and it does it in a certain way. So our approach is informative and guiding, and then with the use of hypnotic trance, which is often very misunderstood, but it's that enabling or creating the best environment for change. We can help our clients to help themselves and resource themselves in the best possible way to create a lasting solution. And I think I often describe myself as a solution focused hypnotherapist as the best non-expert in the world of therapy, but the best at creating an environment for change. And that's really what I know, all of us as solution focused hypnotherapists pride ourselves on. We're not telling our clients what they should or shouldn't do, creating the best environment to help them to realize what they can do and what their future could look like, and enabling their brain to release the controls that maybe are keeping them stuck. So food is just one of the many presentations that we can help with, but it's certainly the one that I spend the majority of my life speaking with my clients. So I hope that helps.
I was just wondering, without kind of going into a specific example, if you could think of some of the ways that clients feel differently after working with you.
It's those little moments of somebody going out for lunch with a family member or friend when they haven't done that for years. They've been so isolated around food. Or again, I feel free, and I had it just this other week. I had a client that I've been working with to support on quietening the food noise and helping her with, losing some weight. And although I choose to not talk about the weight side of things, she came into the session and she said, I actually can't remember when I last thought about food. And that's just such a joy. Now, that doesn't mean she's not eating, because that's very important. But what she meant by that was that she's got this ability now to have just autonomy around food. She can have a breakfast and a lunch. She can go out for meals with friends, but she's not having to pre-plan and feel so prescribed by that. So yeah, weight loss is often, I always say it's the side effect of a well-balanced system where food is concerned. It's not the primary focus for me. It's about helping my clients to, silence that constant chatter so that they have the freedom to live the life that they choose, not just about food, but just generally.
And you mentioned the stress bucket earlier, and I imagine for a lot of the people you're working with, that food noise is filling that bucket all the time and it's overflowing. So when they're not having that noise anymore, they've got so much more capacity, and I imagine that has a huge impact on how they experience their whole world, not just related to food.
But relationships improve. Often, partners are struggling. I'm a mum of someone, my daughter had anorexia. As the carers of people, particularly when I'm talking eating disorders, but disordered eating can be just as limiting. It's very isolating because you're not part of what your family member is going through. But as they make the changes, those barriers start to dissolve and relationships are rekindled. And even, going out for meals with their spouses again, when actually they hadn't been out for years because the two belief systems weren't marrying. So it doesn't just affect the individual, it has a significant knock on to their caring circle as well, and in work too. Many people in the work environment, can't socialize, can't go out for lunches, can't go for the after work drinks, or so everything opens up, the world opens up, and they are much happier in meeting their needs.
Yeah, that's incredible. If somebody listening was thinking, look, I don't even know where to start with some of this stuff. Have you got any kind of tips or anything that you would want them to know about in terms of how they might be able to start helping themselves with this kind of food noise and disordered eating?
Having a think about what would be different if this wasn't dictating your life, allowing yourself to dream a little and open up the avenues of possibility, and trying to befriend food rather than it being the foe all the time. That makes a significant difference to how our relationship with it manifests. And then there are various, clearly come and work with someone like ourselves, a solution focused hypnotherapist. But if you're not ready to make that step, it's just testing the system. I often say to people, test your mind, test how you can quieten the noise. And one of the things that I'll ask them to do is just to close their eyes for a moment, take a couple of breaths just to kind of settle into their space, and then ask themselves one very simple question: what do I want my next thought to be? And they will always find that asking that question, they get a period of peace afterwards because they've taken control of their thinking. And that's a really lovely thing to evidence that they're able to quieten food noise, even just for a moment. But then we know it's possible. And from that, we can build a platform of control moving forward.
Sounds really powerful. And I mean, you can apply it to anything, like you said. It's not just food itself. I'm just thinking as you're saying it, that that technique can help you stop and pause for a minute to think, what do I want the outcome of this to be? So then I now feel like I can make that rational and logical decision about how to move
Yeah,
forward. And for
absolutely.
people who feel kind of more tied up in the emotional part of it, so like you mentioned about how food can sometimes be used to kind of help with dealing with difficult emotions and things like that. Do you have any ideas or thoughts around how people might be able to start with some of that emotional stuff?
Well, I think it comes back with we're talking the language of the stress bucket. And for those people that haven't been familiar with it, it is a very kind of simple metaphor, isn't it? But often our emotions are directly impacted by the stressors that we're coping with in our life. So if we can help to find a purpose, find control in life, maybe find those little things that we used to enjoy doing and start maybe introducing those back into our life again. Not always easy, but help to regulate that stress system, then often some of the coping mechanisms step away. And I think there's a very grey area in this world between the disordered eating and, as I mentioned earlier, eating disorders, which are very, very different in
Um,
their presentation because they are far more limiting and far more restrictive. So require probably a little bit more tailored support from my experience. But whether someone's got an official diagnosis or not, again, that same thought process applies. Is it a problem? Is it impacting your health? Is it impacting your well-being? And having that first chat to find out how a therapist would be able to maybe make some sense of it would always be my advice. You don't have to contract in, just
mm,
reach out and ask some questions and find out whether it sounds right for you.
I think that last point is really important for our listeners to understand as well, in that if somebody was on a waiting list, for example, to get some support, we might be able to help them just relieving some of that stress bucket, which, would help support them emotionally and mentally and give them more capacity as well. So like you kind of touched on it quite a few times, it doesn't always just have to be about the food itself. It can be supporting in other ways as well, like stress management, anxiety management and things like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so much anxiety around food for those people that are struggling with it. So if we can help to mute the anxiety, it
Mm.
helps to make the whole process a lot more manageable.
Yeah. I mean, I know you work a lot in this area, and I think it would be quite interesting to hear your thoughts for somebody who has an eating disorder, for example, how you might bring in other people and make sure that they've got the right
No,
support and the right
absolutely.
care. So, do you mind just talking a little bit about how you would work with that kind of
Yeah.
situation?
Yeah, not at all. Again, it's very unique and very different for every person. Often I find myself being approached by parents of individuals that are experiencing or have been diagnosed with eating disorders, but it manifests in all ages, all sexes. So, really the clientele is very, very different. But it always starts with that first discovery call, trying to work out where they are in their point of recovery. Anorexia tends to be the most the most talked about because it carries, without being negative about it, it carries the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric presentation. So it's, it's a scary illness and it's a very dangerous illness. So from my point of view, I always want to find out where my clients are in relation to recovery. Have they just come out of hospital? Are they perceived as having met the healthy weight guidelines, for example? And then work out where I can fit within the care providers to help with the anxiety management, whilst we have a nutritionist who's dealing with making sure that they are meeting their nutrition needs. And I can help with the anxieties associated with that,
Yeah.
whether they need psychiatric help with medication, which many do. But I will often sit as part of that caring team, helping them to navigate the changes that they're having to make. Because one of the biggest misconceptions about eating disorders is that if someone has made a healthy weight, they are healthy. And
Mm,
the truth is there's often a huge amount of work that needs to be done from that point on to get them to a point where they're absolutely free and healthy in the long term. Because externally they might have gained weight, but internally everything's still really recovering. And that recovery period can take a very long time.
yeah.
So it's understanding that. And one of the things that I find, I guess, I get a lot of pleasure out of, which might sound a little a little weird, is actually being able to help parents, help carers of people that are
Mm,
struggling to understand what their family member is going through, to help explain the process of recovery, help explain how these eating disorders actually manifest in the first place, and more importantly, what we need to do to alleviate the symptomology. So it's a team effort.
mm.
Very rarely do I work on my own with somebody who is diagnosed with a malnourishing eating disorder.
Yeah, yeah. I think that was just important to touch on because obviously, we're talking a lot about disordered eating, and like you said,
Yes.
there's a grey area between
Yeah.
when it's disordered eating, when it turns into an eating disorder, and it's not necessarily that if someone has an eating disorder that we can't help. It's just being mindful of that. In those situations, that person really needs to make sure they've got the right support, the right care in place, and then we can work with people to help them in that solution focused way. And
Absolutely.
I think again, just touching on what you were saying about recovery, solution focused approach is so affirmative when we're talking about recovery because it is looking at the future, isn't it? And thinking about, like you were saying, how would you like things to be? What would your life look like? If you continue on this journey and you continue to make this progress. And I think that can be really positive and uplifting for someone who's felt quite helpless.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think it's that. I often frame it, this is your hour in the week to come and talk about what you want rather than having to sit within the problem. And,
Mhm.
as you say, that's not just in food related issues, is it? But many of them almost leave it at the door and come for an hour of positive affirmation and positive focusing.
Mm,
And many sessions don't involve talking about food at all.
yeah,
And that's really, really freeing for many
yeah.
who have just spent months and that's all that anyone talks about.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really positive message. And I think it's something I'm really keen to get more kind of information about how recovery can be really positive if you're using solution
Oh,
focused therapy because
yeah.
we don't have to go into the details. We don't have to go back over the past. We don't have to talk about what has happened. They've done that. They've gone through that process. They've come out the other side. They're in recovery now. Now it's all about looking to forwards. And so I think like you've kind of been saying along this, we can work with people at all different stages of that journey from the very kind of just beginning of when eating is slightly problematic into disordered eating and then towards the end of recovery as well. So I think there's not really any areas within that kind of disordered eating and food where solution focused hypnotherapy can't have some kind of positive impact.
No, I totally agree. I think it's just that difference between whether we're doing it on a standalone
Yeah.
basis or it's that collaborative team. But I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Where there's anxiety, we're pretty good at helping to mitigate that and make things a little more comfortable.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, I think we've got so much really helpful, useful information today. So if our listeners are interested in how solution-focused hypnotherapy can help them, obviously we have a directory on the AFSFH website with hypnotherapists just like Holly and myself who are qualified solution-focused hypnotherapists who can help with all of the things we've talked about today. So thank you so much for your time, Holly. It's been really helpful and really useful. And I hope the weather is improving slightly for you now.
It's changing, isn't that the joy? The reminder that change is always happening.
It's always happening. And we can't control the weather. We can only control how we respond to the weather. So
Absolutely. Wise word.
we'll leave it on that note. Thank you so much.